Hi, and welcome to part 3 of my chalk and salt videos. Here I'm going to talk about walking the first part of the Southwest Coast Path. This picks up from where I left off at the end of the previous video, which covered the Ridgeway and the Wessex Ridgeway. Check out the first video if you want to know why I set out to do this walk. When I left you last, I'd just gotten to Lyme Regis at the end of the Greater Ridgeway. When I'd originally planned this walk, I thought I'd join up with the coast path there and then continue southwards on the Southwest Coast Path. Now when I'd actually got there, I thought it would be a bit of a shame not to walk the entirety of the Southwest Coast Path. So I made the decision to travel to the start, which is at Poole. I booked an Airbnb in Poole as a nice reward for completing the Greater Ridgeway. I got a bus to Weymouth from Lyme Regis, and then at Weymouth I got a train to Poole, and this took most of the day. Had a bit of dinner, and then stayed overnight in my Airbnb, which was in this lovely lady's flat. Got to have a bath, which was great. Woke up, had some breakfast, and then set off to start the Southwest Coast Path. I walked down through sandbanks, past all the big houses, to where there's a ferry over to the start on Studland. The coast path is obviously defined by its relationship to the sea, and so this was the first of many ferries that I'll be taking over the next couple of months. It is super short, just a couple of 100 metres, takes about 5 minutes. There's a sculpture type thing at the start or end of the coast path, which marks its terminus, and then you're off. The path starts going along beach and dunes, not such great walking. You then soon come to a part of this beach which is a nudist beach, and if you're not happy about that, then there's an inland route if that bothers you. It was a really nice day, very sunny and hot. Definitely felt it walking down the beach, but luckily there's a National Trust place here where I could fill up with some water. And the next month or so was unusually hot for England, bit of a heat wave, pretty much cloudless skies every day. Path then climbs up a little bit onto the Studland cliff and round to Old Harry Rocks. A bit more climbing up and over the cliffs, and then you go down into Swanage. Took the opportunity to buy some food in Swanage and sat in the park here and had a bit of lunch. And then the route goes out right to the end of Peveril Point. There's a slightly inland route that you can go because it can be a bit slippy at times. And you're climbing up onto the cliffs and going through Durlston and towards Durlston Head. Really nice to be able to have the sea by my side at last. Always great to look out at. Going to be my constant companion for the next few months. The rest of the afternoon was along these cliffs, a little bit of up and down, but nothing crazy. It was really hot though, and there's absolutely no shade from the sun. Just before Dancing Ledge, just after Dancing Ledge, I took this path up into Langton, Matravers, where I stayed at a campsite there. I had a little shop at the campsite and I treated myself to an afternoon ice cream. While I was setting up my tarp, the guy camped next to me offered me a beer and we got chatting. He was here with his van for a gravel bike event called the Dorset Dirt Dash. Did a bit of camping and bike packing, and we spent the evening drinking and chatting about camping gear and cycling. So here's where a bit of advanced planning would have been useful. There's a military firing range the coast path goes through, which is only open at the weekend. The gates usually open at about 4 PM on a Friday, which was about a day's walk away, so I knew I had some time to kill before I was able to go through. The alternative is to either walk around, which is really far, or get a taxi, which I didn't want to do. Knowing that I had about 2 days of waiting, I took it pretty easy. Leaving the campsite, I went back down to Dancing Ledge, where I went for a swim, a beautiful sunny day, and then I headed all the way back up the hill to Worth Matravers, where I had my first pasty. The company that I used to work for went on work trips around here, and we often went to this pub. It's a really nice pub, lots of good cider. Fueled up, I headed back down to the coast path around Winspit Quarry, which has these cool caves from the old mines there. While I was doing a bit of sketching, I got chatting to a guy who was also walking the coast path, and around the coast, around St Alban's Head, and starting to get these like crazy go down and then go straight back up again, which are really just difficult. Along top of these cliffs, down and then up this cliff here, this was really steep. It was probably about 50 degrees off the vertical, big steps, really tough. This was the point at the difficulty of the Southwest Coast Path made itself clear. Prior to this, I was thinking to myself, yeah, I've walked for a month, I've walked 600 kilometres, feel a little bit badass, coast path, here I come. And this is where I got humbled and was like, oh, this is going to be really difficult, and I've definitely underestimated it. If you don't know a huge amount about it, the name conjures an image of a nice flat path along by the seaside and ice creams and things. The reality is it literally follows the edge of the coast, in and out and up and down. This gives it loads and loads of sudden elevation loss and gain, which is difficult. I think I was really glad that I started up with a little stretching routine. Definitely woke up very achy a lot of the days, and it helped me to stay healthy and avoid injury. Finally, walking poles are definitely a big help, really help climbing up, and then they also save your knees on the way down. Anyway, luckily after this, the coast path chills out a little bit, and you're going along the top of these cliffs past some nice fields and things, and you can see the Kimmeridge range stretched out ahead of you. Very hot and quite overgrown here though. At the eastern edge of the Kimmeridge Bay is a tower here, Clavel's Tower, and down on the bay there's a sea life centre and some toilets. At Kimmeridge I headed up over this little ridge here to Staple's farm, where there's a campsite. It was super basic and super cheap, only a fiver. Some platted fields, some water, some loos, and some showers. Nothing fancy, and to be honest, as a walker, it's all you really need. Nowadays I'm finding quite a lot of campsites are relatively expensive, like £20, £25 a pop, and as a single walker, just staying for a night, it seems to be a bit excessive. Luckily, lots of the campsites on the Southwest Coast Path have special rates for those walking the path, which helps keep things affordable, and this was one of them. I had most of the day to kill before I could go through the Kimmeridge firing range, so I had a slow start the next day. Leaving the campsite, I went back over into the village of Kimmeridge itself. There's a museum there called the Etches Collection, which this fossil collector Steve Etches has collected from the beach here. This area of the English coast is called the Jurassic Coast and has notable geology and loads of fossils. The museum is really good, lots of amazing fossils, well worth a visit. Spent a good time here looking at them and sketching, and headed back down to Kimmeridge beach itself. Here I went for a swim. The water was still pretty chilly from the winter, which was nice in the heat of the day. Had a bit of lunch, did some reading, checked out the Sea Life Centre. A little bit before 4 I filled up with water and then went to the mini cafe up behind the beach where I had an ice cream. I approached the gate to the range, which is just about here. The flags were down and off I went. The path through the range is marked, loads of warning signs telling you not to stray from the path or pick anything up, and apart from the sheep I had the range completely to myself. The path through the range to Lulworth is short, it's only 12 kilometres, but it does have about 600 metres of climb, and this is done in 4 sections which go from sea level all the way up and then all the way back down to sea level again, and they're really steep as well. But as rewards you get these amazing cliffs and these views. The key is to take it slow and steady. I think before long I'd made it all the way through to Lulworth. I actually took a little shortcut going down here and through Lulworth Cove itself. Lulworth Cove is a all shingly beach, so what I saved on climbing I probably lost in the difficulty on walking on this type of beach. At Lulworth I stopped for a well-deserved drink and some crisps and got some water from the pub. As the sun started setting I headed up onto the cliffs to find somewhere to camp. The path here was pretty busy, loads of people on the path heading to Durdle Door. I had a quick look at Durdle Door and then went on. After Durdle Door there was pretty much no one on the path. I found a little place to spot here at the middle bottom. There was a little trench at the top of the cliffs, sort of shielded from the path. Someone had set a tent up in the bottom of this area here, but I thought I'd leave them to some peace. It was quite windy, but I cowboy camped low in my bivvy bag, and as the dusk turned to night the stars came out and I could see the lights from the boats in Portland Harbour and Portland itself beyond. I got quite cold in the night and I packed up quickly. As I was finishing packing up, the person who'd been camping at the bottom of the valley came by. She'd walked the entirety of the coast path from Minehead and was on her way to finish. She started out in Mar, had some pretty rough weather at points, had a little chat, wished each other luck and then set off. Luckily after about a kilometre you arrive along the top of these cliffs and the elevation change starts to chill out as you approach Weymouth. Still a bit of up and down, but nowhere nearly as steep as the preceding few days. The island of Portland to the south became way more visible as well. At Bowley's, which is around here, there's a holiday park with a cafe where I had some coffee and some toast for breakfast. A final tiny little bit of up and down, and then you're on the promenade and heading down into Weymouth. Classic south coast seaside town. I walked down through to the town, this little cove here, and then loop back to the train station because it is time for another intermission. At Weymouth I took the train back to my family for about a week or so's break. It was my parents' 40th wedding anniversary. They got married at Acton Town Hall in their registry office and didn't really have much of a celebration, so they decided to throw a big party for their 40th. I came home early both to rest and also help them set everything up. Lots of their friends and family came over and it was a really nice time. Also, the phone, which I'd had for about 6 years, had started to die on me. I'd been keeping it going by repairing it myself, replaced the screen and the charging ports and the battery, which is surprisingly easy to do with some phones. Anyway, the screen had started to go on this trip. Part of it no longer responded to touch and I decided this was the time to replace it. Lots of apps no longer worked on it as well, and I needed something which would be okay with being outside and I didn't need to worry about. I managed to find a rugged phone which A, isn't a brick, and B, doesn't look horrendous. I found this Motorola one, and since I got it, it's been rained on, dropped a few times, been in the cold in Sweden, and it's all good. Phone advert over, and let's get back to walking. So, fortified by a nice little rest and seeing my family, I set off on the Southwest Coast Path again. Back on the train from Bristol to Weymouth. I think I arrived just after lunch and headed back down to where I'd left the coast path in Rodwell. This goes south along a shared use path through some pretty residential areas. Not super interesting, but you do get some nice views out to Portland Harbour every now and then. Eventually come to Chesil Beach, connects the mainland to the Isle of Portland. There's a long flat path by a quite busy A road. Portland End, there's an industrial estate with a Lidl where I got some food for the night, and then wiggled through these marinas, Fortune's Well and the high bits of the island. Prison and an old fort here which looks pretty secure, past some of the quarries and onto the east side of the island. The path descends down into these scree fields below the cliffs. Really unique landscape here, lots of big cliffs and scree fields. I turned off the main path a bit as it was quite overgrown. There's a cool little church here, sort of like nestled within the cliffs, and then the island starts to flatten out a fair amount once you pass Southwell. You can see all these little quarries right by the sea as you head down towards Portland Bill. The stone they quarry is really good quality and they use it all over the UK for loads of famous buildings. Portland Bill, it's the tip of Portland. It's pretty cool. The sun was low in the sky and the wind was picking up, making it seem quite remote. There's an obelisk here, which I think is a day mark for the southern point of the island. There's a pub just up the road from the Bill where I stopped for a drink and a little rest. Then up onto the cliffs and a short way inland for my campsite for the night. A nice little place. It was fairly windy, but I set up my tarp and made some dinner. Went over to the cliff edge to watch the sunset. I could see the land ahead silhouetted and I could just about make out Lyme Regis in the distance. The day starts out with a nice flat path along the top of these cliffs. Really good views out. The path is right by the cliffs, and at one point there was a diversion inland because the path had become unstable, but this diversion took me into this Tout Quarry Sculpture Park. Everything here was sculpted from the Portland stone and was pretty cool. And then a pretty steep descent down into Chiswell, where I got some breakfast bits, and then headed down to Chesil Cove for a swim. This is the eastern end of Chesil Beach. It's a 30-kilometre shingle beach that stretches all the way out to West Bay. At this end, all the pebbles are pretty large, which makes it a bit uncomfortable walking down to the sea, but the sea itself was nice and calm and the water was crystal clear. Had a really nice swim and then enjoyed a banana and a croissant in the sun. Back along onto the spit which connects Portland to the mainland. There's a little visitor centre for Chesil Beach here with a cafe you can go into, but you're pretty much going back the way you came, and there was a little detour through these houses before I rejoined. Pretty wiggly and not much shade from the sun at this point. I stopped on the grass outside the holiday park to have my lunch, got talking to another walker who was also stopped there and was also walking the coast path. A little chat, but continued onwards in the heat and started to think, geez, I should have picked up a little bit more water because I'm really drinking through it pretty quickly and it is really, really hot. Luckily, there's a fancy hotel here, Moonfleet Manor, which kind of looks like a castle, but it has a little cafe. I had an iced coffee and sat in the shade, and it turned out that Jamie, the guy I'd met in Winspit Quarry, was sitting nearby and joined him. We spent a good while chatting. He was quite a funny guy and was telling me all about his digestive issues. I said goodbye and then set back off into the afternoon heat. Onwards along the East Fleet for a while, and then you turn inland and start to head up onto these hills. Beautiful afternoon, but really sweaty. by the time I'd reached here. Really good views though, so kind of worth it. And then down past Abbotsbury. I didn't go into Abbotsbury. There's a swannery here, and it was closed for the day by the time I reached it. Luckily, around the back of one of the buildings, there was a tap where I could refill my water and have a drink. And then back onto Chesil Beach. There's a car park here, and it's a short way up onto the beach. There were loads of people fishing off the beach in the dusk. Apparently it's a really easy place to catch mackerel here. I made myself a bit of dinner on the beach and watched the sunset. Really nice evening. A short way back inland, I found myself a little spot to sleep. Dry night, so I cowboy camped again. Went back to the car park in the morning to use the toilet, and as I was setting off again, Poole, the man who I'd met yesterday when I was having lunch at the holiday park, was there. We got talking and we walked together for a while. He lived near Bristol and had done loads of walking. We discussed our strategies for blisters. We'd be both getting the same ones on the inside of our second little toes. Walked on to past West Bexington on the shingle, which is not so nice to walk on. Real pain in the arse, to be honest. When we reached Codgeston Beach, he decided to go for a swim, and I decided to continue onwards to Hythe Beach, where there's a cafe. Got myself some water and treated myself to a nice coffee. Coast path then diverts inland here. There's lots of diversions on the coast path because the land is constantly slipping into the sea and some of the cliffs are unstable, and this part of the coast is especially affected. Past these holiday paths, up and down these cliffs and into West Bay. Here I went down to the beach and had a swim, nice and refreshing in the sea. Sat on the beach and had some lunch after, where a seagull almost pinched my lunch. West Bay was pretty busy with people down for the weekend. Picked up some water at a cafe and then set off for the afternoon. The previous few days had been relatively flat, and now it was time for the hills to kick back in. This climb to Salcombe Beacon was pretty tough, but the view was worth it. And then back down into Salterton, and then almost immediately after you climb all the way up to Golden Cap. Got to get used to these downhills and then immediately back up, because that's what the coast path is all about. At the top here I had a bit of a rest in the shade, and then this next stretch going to Dartmouth was super tough. It was hot, there was lots of up and down. I didn't really have as much water as I would have liked. Definitely felt like it dragged on for a little bit longer than I would have liked, but I eventually ended up in Dartmouth, where I went to the pub and treated myself to a well-deserved drink. Got some water, nice to be out in the sun. Up out of Dartmouth and around this golf course, go around it and then descend towards Lyme Regis. I turned off into the Spittles, where there's some sort of open fieldy bits. I cooked myself some dinner, and then I went into the Spittles themselves, which are these kind of like crumbly undercliff places where the land has slipped down into the sea. I found a little sheltered spot in the woods and camped there for the night. Next morning, coming back down into Lyme Regis again. Stopped here for a coffee, and after I got myself sorted out, did a bit of stretching in the car park, and then went into the undercliffs. And there's a warning sign as soon as you climb up into here that says that it's a really tough walk to the other end and that there's no kind of way out if you decide that it's not for you, so you just have to go through it. And they're absolutely right, it's constantly up and down, really rough underfoot, kind of crumbly, lots of little steps, but it's also really beautiful. The undercliffs are shaded and they're full of lush plants, so it's definitely worth the effort. And then coming out of the undercliffs up onto these cliffs, I met a guy who was walking the entirety of the England coast path, which is absolutely epic. There's a short descent down into Salterton. The last time I was here was on a disastrous bike tour where I cycled all day through a storm and got soaked. So it's much nicer to be here in the sun. I went to the Tesco here, which has to be the nicest Tesco I've ever been into. It's really airy and it's all made of big wood beams and columns. Got a bit of lunch and sat on the seawall and ate it. Managed not to get swooped by the seagulls here. As I was about to head off, someone approached me and asked if I was walking the coast path. They were about to walk it themselves and asked me for some tips, and it felt kind of good that someone had recognised me as a bit of a hiker. Then the coast path heads up over the cliffs to Beer. The tide was going out, so I decided to do a little shortcut along the beach rather than going over the cliffs. Some small risk from the cliffs above, but I decided it was worth it. There's a small breakwater at the end of the Beer beach, and the cliffs come right down to the sea. I had to wait for about half an hour for the tide to lower itself enough that I could wade through the breakwater and climb up the ladder onto Beer Beach. Had a swim at Beer and then went up into Beer and had a drink. Can't go through Beer and not have a beer. And then up onto the cliffs to Beer Head and back down through some more of the undercliffs, which were dramatic but not at all easy. At Branscombe, I headed up the valley to the campsite that I was going to stay at, which was a little bit of a diversion and quite a lot more climbing than I wanted to do that day. But the campsite was really nice, and I made the mistake of accidentally booking the day before and not realising it, but they let me stay for this night anyway, which is very nice of them. Camped next to an older couple from Yorkshire who'd done loads of bike touring and had a good chat to them about that. Later an ice cream bicycle came around and I got myself an ice cream. Back down into the valley and I took a detour through Branscombe proper, up past the church and back onto the coast path. Bit of a grey and cloudy day, but also kind of quite warm and muggy at the same time. It's mostly flat along the cliffs here until you reach, you're in classic close path style, you head all the way down to the beach, walk along the beach for about 20 metres and then climb all the way back up. I was sweating hard by the time I came up on the other side of this. And then you repeat the really similar thing on the kind of next valley. Here I met a older man who'd been walking the coast path. He was an experienced walker and had completed the entirety of the Wales coast path. He told me that, in his words, he found Southwest coast path soul destroying. He said that the way that the coastline constantly goes in and out and up and down made me feel a little bit apprehensive about the rest of the path, to be honest. But too far into this to pull out. Up over these cliffs and down into Sidmouth. I think I sat here and had a little bit of lunch. Up and over and round through these bits, past this big old holiday park, down this bit was refreshingly flat, to be honest, which was really nice. And now here, the Southwest Coast Path, that's this kind of like diversion up to the bridge and then back down. But at low tides, you can actually wade this bit of the river. So I took my shoes off, hitched up my pants and waded across. And the water only really came up to my knees, dried myself off and then went into Budleigh itself. Got myself some dinner, which I ate by a bench by the sea, and then headed to find somewhere to sleep, which involved going up onto these cliffs, and then I actually headed into this kind of Knoll Hill plantation area here, and tried to find some spots, but nothing really seemed great. It seemed like a good place, but then I looked down at my legs and found them crawling with ticks, which I wasn't really happy about. So I went back towards the coast path and I found a tiny hidden little spot underneath a tree by the golf course where I set up my sleeping mat and made a bit of a cowboy camp. Woke up and extracted myself from underneath the tree on the path past this absolutely huge holiday park and over some pretty flat paths. You come to the end of the Jurassic Coast where there's this geoneedle sculpture which marks it, and then it's pretty flat into Exmouth, just along the path and the road and the beaches. At Exmouth you get a second of the Southwest Coast Path ferries over to Starcross. This next section has a fair few more of these as you work your way down through South Devon and Cornwall. I had a cafe breakfast while I waited for the crossing, and then the boat over only takes about 15-20 minutes and dumps you out here by station along by a road for a little bit, but at Cockwood you turn off the A road, it becomes a little bit quieter into Dawlish Warren, and at Dawlish Warren there's an option for which route you can take. You can either cross over the railway and go by the sea or go up onto the cliffs. If the tide is right, I would say go over the railway and along the seawall. The seawall runs along by the side of the railway and is really nice. There's something about it which made me feel like I was in a Studio Ghibli film. Big puffy clouds and amazing red cliffs. Came down through Dawlish, didn't really stop here, continued upwards and then over the cliffs and through Holcombe, back down onto the seafront, and you're going along by the railway and breakwater, and before long you head into Teignmouth, nice little town. There's a ferry over the river onto the other side. On the way across, a lady from Australia started talking to me. Ended up having a drink with her on the other side of the beach and having a pretty long conversation. And then I went onwards through Shaldon to my campsite. for the night, which was somewhere around here. I'd realised that I needed to make sure that I had rest days every week or so to recover from all the walking. Towards the end of the Wessex Ridgeway, I'd been walking for almost 2 weeks without a proper rest day, and by the end of it I could feel myself getting pretty tired. So I had a rest here in Shaldon. The campsite was pretty nice, if a little bit rocky. On my rest day I walked into Plymouth, where I washed my clothes at the laundrette, and then went and had lunch and spent the afternoon in Wetherspoons there, charging my phone, planning the next sections and doing some reading. Picked up some food and went back to the campsite to make myself a bit of dinner where I could use some vegetables. And there was another walker at the campsite, a guy in his 70s, who was walking a coast path, carrying a pack and camping. A pretty epic thing to do at that age. So coming out of Shaldon, I go back along the river and up onto the cliffs. This is pretty up and down, not so easy to be honest. The sun was out and it got hot pretty quickly. And at Paignton Beach there's a little cafe which I went down to, had an iced coffee and got some more water. Back up onto the cliffs and through these really wiggly paths. At Budleigh I had lunch in the shade and topped up some more water again. And then you go through Branscombe and around towards Torquay. Really nice round the head and round into Torquay and Torbay. This is a really good section. But suddenly you come into this quite busy seaside town, walking your way around and into the busyness of Torquay and Paignton. Work my way around through all of the kind of busyness of it to Paignton itself, where I diverted inland. There aren't any campsites in the town itself, and obviously it's not a good place for wild camping because it's so built up. So I ended up heading inland to go to the nearest campsite, which had spaces in. On my way, I stopped at Amazon locker at Morrison's. So the sleeping bag I'd started with was way too warm for the summer. I've been waking up covered in sweat over the past week or so. So I'd ordered a camping quilt. I collected it from the locker and then packaged up my sleeping bag in the package ready to send home. Quite a lot of road walking on the way to the campsite, but the campsite itself was pretty nice. Unfortunately, as I was setting up my tent, I left my bag and my food out, and I looked away for a minute and suddenly I hear a big flapping and this seagull swoops down and eats the croissants which I bought, which was really annoying. It's a lesson to keep an eye out for these things there. There were a couple from Cornwall who had camped nearby me in the camper van. They were walkers too and had loads of experience, so it was good to have a bit of a chat to them. It was a long walk back to the coast path, so I decided to see if I could hitch a ride, and just when I was walking along here, the two Cornish walkers from previous day came past in their camper van and stopped for me, kindly gave me a lift into Goodrington. I felt a little bit bad because they were heading in the wrong direction, but they said they'd gotten enough hitches in their time that they were happy to pay it forward. In Goodrington I went to the post office and shipped my sleeping bag back home. It's a good ½ kilogram off my pack weight, and then quickly back to the coast path along the railway and past these coves here, a nice bit of shade through the woods, round into Brixham, which was pretty nice, pretty cute. Here I got myself my first proper pasty, which was tasty. After eating it by the harbour, I went up to Bury Head, which is a nice place to look out to sea, and then looping back round the headland and round the back of Brixham through these nature reserves a little bit and down to Man Sands, where I went for a swim. It was such a hot day that I really needed to cool off in the sea. The sea was still pretty cold at this time of year, so it was nice and refreshing. Once I'd had a rest, I went up onto the cliffs and into the beating sun again. A little bit of a drag around here. At Collerton Fishacre, I used my water filter for the only time on this trip because I'd run out of water and it was so hot. Shortly after, I worked my way round to Kingswear and Dartmouth. A really interesting place, full of boats and very naval. There's a ferry across the river from Kingswear into Dartmouth itself, which is on the west side. Picked up some little bits from the shops and then went down to Wharfleet and to Dartmouth Castle. Took myself a bit of dinner here on the bench by Dartmouth Castle, overlooking the sea, watching the boats coming in and out. A tiny public toilet here, open all hours. I filled my water up from the tap. Then I climbed up onto Gallant's Bower, where I made my camp for the night at the top of the hill. Super nice camp spot where I cowboy camped. Back down to the castle, filled up with water, had a nice stretch on the grass, and then round the coast and up onto Little Dartmouth. Not even 9 o'clock and it's already feeling pretty hot. Inland for a little bit, through Stoke Fleming, bit of road walking, it is what it is. Climb back up again and go into street. A little general store here sold donut peaches, which I'd never encountered before, and honestly they're a revelation. They're so good. Down to Slapton Sands and this really big long beach. Path here is super sandy, exposed, and was a hot and sweaty time. Eventually you come all the way down into Tor Cross, where I had a little break over some more cliffs again, a short walk over into B Sands, where I went for another refreshing swim. Definitely needed because it was so hot. Had a bit of lunch after this. Given it was so warm, I decided that the sensible thing to do would be to wait out the midday heat. The day before, I definitely felt like I was heading towards having a little bit of heat stroke. So I sat outside under a parasol at the pub there, sipped lime and soda and read for a while. And once it had gotten to about 4 o'clock and had cooled off a bit, I set off again and went out towards Start Point. Really nice views out to sea. Once you're around Start Point, the path becomes really rocky, lots of exposed kind of scrambly bits through here. As you come around here, you go along these like flat bottoms under these cliffs, and I really liked this part. It felt really kind of separated from everywhere. It felt really kind of, really like wild. Eventually came to Poole Point, where there's a Coast Guard lookout station. These are run by this National Coast Guard charity, and they have volunteer sea watch people. I had a nice chat to the watch officer there, who was a retired teacher. He gave me a bit of water and told me about places to camp further on. The next bit here is super rocky and a really cool place to walk through. There's some good spots below Garrow Rock. There's already someone camped here, so I went onwards towards Salcombe. At Wreckham Common, found a little patch in the grass where I set up my sleeping mat, beefy bag, and I had another cowboy camp. Onwards to get the Salcombe ferry. Stopped at these public toilets here to get some water. This walk has really made me appreciate public toilets, especially ones with taps in rather than those automated hand dryer combo things. I got the first ferry over from Portsmouth to Salcombe. I went to the shops and had a banana and a croissant. Salcombe was pretty nice. I went sailing around here when I was younger. A little bit of up and down out of Salcombe and around these beaches. So I was coming up a hill here. Another walker came in the other direction who was carrying a didgeridoo, and he stopped to talk to me. He said I needed to be ambivalent about the challenges, and rather than saying, "Phew, that hill was really tough, I need to have a big break now," just to be like, "Eh." I later learned that his name was Fergal of the Path, and he was a Navy veteran who's walked the coast path about 10 times now. Continuing out of Salcombe round to Bolt Head and Sharp Tor. Lots of really dramatic rocks here. Nice kind of like granity cliffs. Along the tops of the cliffs a little bit, with a couple of little like ducts down into valleys, but nothing kind of too crazy. You come through Bulbury Down and round to Bolt Tail, and you descend down in Inner and Outer Hope, which are great names. Had some lunch by the sea and then went to the pub where I got myself some water, lime and soda. Continuing on through Thurleston and Thurleston Stands, past the golf course here and round to Bantam Sands, where I went for a refreshing afternoon swim. I dried myself off and then went over to the Bantam ferry. This only runs for a few hours each day, and I think it's linked to the tide times. You need to make sure that you get it to avoid quite a long detour. Once I was over the ferry, it was a short climb up to the campsite that I'd chosen, which was kind of around here. It was mid-afternoon when I arrived, so I took some time to do a bit of admin. The mesh that made up the straps on my backpack had been absorbing my sweat and had started to smell really bad. I removed the bits that I could and used the campsite wetsuit washing area to have a bit of a clean. Later on, a big storm rolled in overnight and I tucked myself under my tarp and read. So today I was going to cross the River which is a couple of hours away. At low tide you can wade over it, while at high tide it's a really long walk around. Lots of people who miss it either get a lift or get a taxi around. Low tide was at midday, so I'd set off early to make sure that I could get there in time. Going down through Bigbury and round up on these cliffs, and somewhere around here I met a mother and son who were walking the entirety of the coast path together, Kerry-Ann and Finn, and Finn was 12 and he was carrying his own pack, which I thought was pretty epic. They were raising money for the RLNI. While we were talking, we spotted a pod of dolphins out at sea. I snapped a pic of their backpack so I could donate to them when it said signal, and then said goodbye and set off around the cliffs and to the river and the beaches here in Wembury Beach. The map shows the crossing further up. I think that because it had been so dry, the river level was lower than usual, so I was able to cross further down, sort of like in between Wembury and Owens Point. Anyway, I took my boots off and hiked up my shorts and waded over, and the river only came up halfway to my knees. On the other side, I stopped on the beach and went for a swim. Lots of seaweed in the water, so not actually that great. Bit of lunch, and then continued onwards. This next section here was fairly overgrown, but not too much up and down. This next section was fairly overgrown, but there wasn't too much up and down, so it was actually kind of okay. I don't remember a huge amount about it, although as I started heading further west and sort of around here, I could see the Cornish cliffs stretching away far in the distance. The nice thing about this path is that points you can look forward to where you'll be and also look back to see where you've been before, because of the way that the coast curves around the Yelm Crossing and Newton Ferrers. There's some really nice woods here. Loads of boats moored in this channel. At Yelm Poole, I got a ferry over to Newton Ferrers, where I went into town and picked something up for dinner from the co-op there. I went to the pub for a drink to do some reading and journaling. The ferry here is an electric community run one, and the ferryman picked me up at the landing in Newton Ferrers and took me over to where the coast path continues. I got talking to him, and he'd done some walking himself. Told me all about his time on the Camino de Santiago more than 20 years ago. He'd walked it after the breakup of his marriage. He dropped me off on the other side, up and over some cliffs and down into Wembury itself. At the beach there was a public toilet where I used a tap to refill my water with. Continued onwards a little bit and went down to the beach and made myself a little bit of dinner. After that I went just about a kilometre further to Wembury Point, where I found a flattish spot below these cliffs and cowboy camped. Got pretty dewy overnight. I was glad that I swapped my sleeping bag out for this camping quilt. I'm a warm sleeper, and being too hot is the worst thing for me at night. After packing up, I went round a little bit into Crown Hill Bay. I sat on a bench overlooking the bay and ate some breakfast, brushed my teeth and filled up on some water at a tap there, and went onwards, over and up above Fort Bovisand. Really overgrown here, and the cork handle that I'd made from a walking pole got pretty snagged up and ripped up along here, unfortunately. But eventually came down into Mountbatten and I could see all of Plymouth ahead of me. There's a ferry over here, but the route doesn't get the ferry and goes round all the way to this kind of road bridge here. Lots of the coast path walkers I'd met had little moans about this section around through Plymouth because it's built up and a bit industrial, but I don't mind it so much, you know. It is what it is. And I stopped off at a dark doors somewhere around here and picked up some outdoor bits, including a monocular so I could look out to sea. A really good purchase, only a £5. And going through Catterdown, I recognised some little bits of it because I'd done a cycle tour from Plymouth to Bristol and started it by coming through this way. I had a bit of lunch at a park here, crossed over the marina around the roads here. There's an amazing lido here. Down by the side of it there's also an area where you can access the sea, a little beach, and lots of people down here are going for a swim, so I went down and joined them. Then onwards to my hostel for the night. I wanted to have a rest day in Plymouth. I booked 2 nights at this hostel, dropped my stuff off, went to town and had a pub dinner. The next day I did some admin in Plymouth, went to a laundrette to wash my clothes, sat in a cafe charging the phone and planning the next sections, and also filled up my sketchbook, so I sent it home and bought a new one. By this point I'd gotten more into the swing of planning things on the fly and was way more comfortable with all the logistics of walking. It also turned out my friend Polly and her sister Laura were down in Cornwall in their camper van. They were passing by and they came into Plymouth for the day to meet up, had some fish and chips by the harbour and avoided getting swooped by seagulls, and then went down to this bar by the harbour and had a drink in the sun, said our goodbyes and went back to the hostel. And that's it for this section of walking. By this point I've covered just over 1,000 kilometres, which is a big milestone. I'd been keeping a little log in the back of my journal with the distances for each day and also the cumulative distances. It really helps to boost your morale when you're a bit tired, and then you go and look at it and you can see how far you've come. That being said, I definitely underestimated the coast path. A really rough measure of a path's physical difficulty is the ratio of elevation gain to distance covered. So that's how many metres up or down per kilometre. Here you can see the ratio for a variety of paths. At the lower end you have things like the Pedder's Way and the Ridgeway, which are pretty gentle. And then at the top end of the scale you have things like the Appalachian Trail and the crazy GR20 in Corsica. The Southwest Coast Path lies a bit below these, but it has more average elevation change than the Pacific Crest Trail in the US. The PCT is a remote wilderness trail with its own challenges, but this illustrates that the Southwest Coast Path is no walk in the park. Physically, I was feeling okay, pretty tired after long days of walking up and down, but stretching and keeping up with the rest days, keeping me going injury free, and making sure I was hydrated in the heat was important too. Let's take a look at the blister scope. I kept getting these blisters on the inside of my second little toe, which were super painful and annoying, and the sweaty feet caused by the hot weather didn't help with this. Accommodation wise, I was mostly sleeping outside, half wild and half in campsites. I had one night in a hostel and one night at home with my family. Definitely feel like I'd gotten used to places to wild camp now, much more comfortable with it. The South Devon coast is really beautiful. The section from Brixham round to Portsmouth really stands out for me. Quite remote feel to it, and all these river crossings and little towns and villages nestled in the estuaries. That and the beautiful weather made this one of the most memorable parts of the walk for me. In the next video, I enter into Cornwall, head towards Land's End and come round onto the north coast. Thanks for watching and see you soon.